Hello everyone and welcome back to Star Wars Loose Cannon. My name is Chris Higgins and I'll be your host today. And in this edition of the Essential Clone Wars series, I will be covering the Death Trap arc from Season 2 of the Clone Wars. Tune in to this episode to hear how the young clone, Boba Fett, with the help of a group of bounty hunters, seeks vengeance for the death of his father, Jango, at the hands of Mace Windu. And this arc kicks off on Season 2, Episode 20, and the episode is called Death Trap. And I have this little guide that is on Reddit, and it's called So You Want to Watch the Clone Wars, but you don't want to watch the whole series. And it's got a list of all of the really, what they consider essential arcs, and I don't know if I had actually watched this because they didn't recommend this particular episode as one of the main arcs, but they do put it as an honorable mention. And just because it had, anytime I see a 3-episode arc, I'm going to be interested in reviewing it. And I'm not doing all of them, but because this one had Boba Fett, I thought it would be interesting, and I turned out to be correct in that. And you'll guys will hear why. So in this, and how I do these episodes is I just talk about briefly what happened in each episode, and then give my thoughts on it, my major takeaways, and then I review the arc as a whole, give it a score as well. So in episode 20, one thing I noticed right away is that they do set up the episode as being happening after the Geonosis arc, which we actually reviewed. So that was interesting. A lot of the times the continuity they don't talk about something that just happened in a previous episode. They'll talk about what the characters were doing and what led to the moment that we're in. But oftentimes it doesn't reference something that we had actually seen happen recently. And it also just gives a little bit of a reminder that each episode that happens isn't not happening chronologically necessarily, because the Geonosis arc, I think, was a couple episodes back. So that's also a little interesting thing I noticed from the beginning of this episode. But let's talk about what actually happened in this episode. So after that little introduction, the episode begins with a group of young clone recruits getting some training on board a Jedi cruiser. And we learn that Boba Fett is able to infiltrate this group. Obviously, he looks just like all of the rest of the clones, so it's easy for him to do that. And interestingly, they all have different hairstyles, but Boba's is a little bit longer, which makes him stand out a little bit, but not enough to raise any suspicion. So upon arrival, the young recruits are greeted by Mace Windu and Anakin kind of butts in while Mace is talking to introduce himself, and actually gets Mace a little bit pissed off that he was kind of showing off. But I think it does impress them. So one of the things that they do immediately is a little training exercise, and they do like skeet shooting with blasters with like turrets off of the ship. And Boba proves himself to be like an extremely good shot, and so much that this guy, Admiral Killian, really praises him, and the other clone soldiers are like, I can't believe you did that. That must have been really lucky. So we just see really right away that Boba is extremely capable. And as they continue on, they having this tour of the ship, and that's when Boba he kind of strays away from the rest of the group, and you finally see what he's actually there to do. And he is trying to find a way to get to Mace Windu's quarters, which somehow he knows where that is. And he kind of has to slip past some people and and kind of tricks people into thinking that he's delivering a message to him or delivering something to his room. And he gets by some troopers. And when he gets there, he puts a bomb there that has a little tripwire bomb. And he leaves, and when he comes back, when actually Mace Windu comes back to it, right before he's about to go into his room. He gets called away by Anakin, and later on, he asks the clone trooper to go to his room to get something for him, and then that clone trooper sets off the bomb, and that's when everything starts to go haywire within the ship. So then the entire ship is under alert, and as a result of that, Boba is told that because it wasn't successful, they didn't actually kill Mace. He asked them to sabotage the reactor, and which would actually kill everyone aboard the ship. And Boba does have a little bit of hesitation there, but he does go along with it, and he does successfully explode the reactor, which gets the whole ship going haywire. And after that happens, the Jedi are almost blown out into space. They use the Force to rescue Killian, which was a cool scene. And everyone has to abandon ship. Admiral Killian, he says, no, I'm going to go down with the ship. And he says he doesn't expect the Jedi to understand why, even though Anakin ordered him to abandon ship. And that's when Boba goes off in a pod with some of his other clone recruits. And he actually sabotages that as well, so that the pod goes off into space in a different direction than all the other escapees. And then Slave One comes along with Aura Singh and Bosk, who are his bounty hunter buddies. And they find him. They open up the escape pod, and then it's revealed that I was working with these guys all along. And he does show a little bit of regret that he did all these things, probably because he never really had to face up to his actual actions until he met these people. And he seemed a little bit regretful. He doesn't want to it seems like he doesn't want to kill anyone other than Mace. So when the other bounty hunters show little regard for anyone else's safety or life, he does get a little upset about that. But he, at the end of the day, he does go back along with Aura Singh, who is playing the role of his mentor. So after that, the clones are saying that he'll be sorry, but eventually he actually does get away. So it's a bit of a setup arc, and that seems to be, or a setup episode. But that's always, I've noticed this trend where the first episode in the arc seems to have a lot of action in it, but then also seems to set up a grander plot. So it's a good way. It's an interesting and good way of doing that. Otherwise, the first episode would maybe just be a lot of talking and a lot of background, but it's usually not the case. And I really liked about this episode was Boba Fett. His character makes a lot of sense to me, that he would be on a mission of vengeance, and his personality matches what we saw of him from the movie. He was kind of a brooding, angry looking kid, but he clearly loved his dad, and that's pretty much the only real friend or that we know of that he had. That was the only person that he had in his life. So even though Jango to us seems sort of a villain, no, they had that relationship. And then Mace Windu, he sees Mace Windu kill him. So that's also a good idea for the show to take that bit, just knowing they took that, the movie goes to pains to show you that he witnessed that happen. So it did leave a very clear thread for some other show or movie or comic book to take from that. And this is clearly done that. So I just like this origin story because it seems to make a lot of sense, and it takes advantage of the character and the opportunity to do this. So another thing that's kind of going on that we're starting to see in this episode is the dynamic between Mace Windu and Anakin, and how they're obviously two very different people. Anakin is flashy and he kind of does what he wants, and Windu is much more strict and has a certain way of doing things, and he really seems to wants to stick within the Jedi code and procedure. And he just doesn't like Anakin's flashy personality and um, going off the cuff with everything. So you do see that that's a juxtaposition there of these two personalities, which is interesting to see. We don't know, Mace Windu doesn't always take a big part in these episodes, so that's a fun to see those two personalities. And we recently covered in an episode how Windu and Count Dooku would go on missions together, and he really wanted Dooku to stick to the confines of their mission and not go outside of that. So that's just Mace Windu's personality. But yeah, just a good episode and a good way to set up this arc. Speaking of setting things up, one way to set up your day better is with Magic Mind, which is a productivity shot that I like to take daily. And I love it because I love caffeine, guys. Probably a little bit too much, if I'm being quite honest. Try to stay within 1 to 2 coffees. Oh, let's be honest. I'm having like 2 to 3 coffees a day these days. But instead of drinking more coffee, I tend to want to drink something a little bit different, something that has vitamins and supplements and maybe some natural way of getting energy. Maybe it's a substitute for you. Maybe it's just a complement. I sometimes do one or the other. Sometimes I like to put it in a smoothie that I'm having. But Magic Mind is great for me because you do get a sense of energy and a little bit of that buzz that you want from coffee, and helps give your mind better cognitive function that coffee can give you without adding more caffeine to your day, which can give you the jitters and can honestly it messes up your sleep and can cause you more stress the more that you have. So I would say it's been a really honestly great thing for me. I'm a big person on taking vitamins daily, but Magic Mind makes it so easy because they pack so many different things like lion's mane, mushroom, chlorophyll, matcha, cordyceps mushroom, B vitamins, L-theanine, vitamin C and D3, turmeric, ashwagandha. All these things you can have that give you more energy with less stress. I love the fact that I can get this in a little shot that actually tastes really good. I put it in the fridge. I have it probably in the afternoon, maybe after my second coffee for the day, and I think it just kind of shoots me through the rest of my day. And you can get a discount from this show, guys. We have a discount for you if you go to www.magicmind.com/Star Wars. You can get 20% off your first time order if it's just a one-time purchase. Maybe you just want to try it. But if you want to get a subscription, you can get up to 48% off your first subscription with code StarWars20. So give Magic Mind a shot. See what I did there? Go to magicmind.com/Star Wars to try it out. You will be doing yourself a favor by having more energy and living a healthier lifestyle. And you'll be doing the show a favor by supporting us and showing our sponsors that we really help them. Now, back to the show. Now, episode 21. Let's talk about episode 21. So after the destruction of the ship, it crash landed, and obviously Killian decided to go down with the ship. And now their task is to go down to the destruction of the Star Destroyer Endurance, which crash landed on the planet Vancor, and try to find him and any crew that was left behind. So the two Jedi they set down behind the ship, and they actually have R2 with them, and he's saying he's got a bad feeling about this, and the planet is very dark, and it's a very sinister looking scene, and you do see that there are some, creatures stalking them in the distance, and those are actually Gundarks, and they're all not aware of that at the time. So, unfortunately for Anakin and Mace, the Boba and his fellow bounty hunters have laid another trap for them. So they're obviously they decide that, he's probably in the bridge. That's where he would have been. So they decide to search for him there. And when they get to the bridge, along the way, they do notice a lot of troops, a lot of clones that were shot and killed, which is not what they were expecting because they didn't die in the wreckage. So it does start to lead to some suspicion. And then in the middle of a room that they go into, they find what looks like Jango Fett's helmet. And Anakin is like, what's a Mandalorian helmet doing right here? And Mace is like, he starts to put things together as they get closer, as Anakin starts getting closer to it. He's starting to notice, like, okay, I'm seeing the clone troopers. I'm seeing this what looks like Jango Fett's helmet. And now I'm remembering that it was Boba Fett that tried to kill us. And he realizes what's happening and quickly uses the Force to grab Anakin and pull him away from the helmet, which Anakin just picked up, and it explodes. And then a bunch of debris falls on them, and they're trapped in the room. So at that very moment, on a cliff nearby, Boba is watching with a pair of binoculars, and he sees the bridge explode, and it's a really big explosion. And they all conclude that they must have died, but because they really aren't sure, and conveniently, what's her name? Aura, the bounty hunter that's basically in charge, she's like, well, if we want to get any kind of bounty for this, we have to be certain that we have to provide some evidence that there was that they were killed. So they said they got to go in there and see the body, bring the head or whatever they can back to potentially Dooku. So she seems to now have a monetary reason for helping kill Mace at this time. So a lot of them don't want to do it, but they, some of them decide. There's one reliant bounty hunter among them that doesn't want to help out anymore, but they do decide that they need to go in there. They all agree that double the payout could be worthwhile. So they go there, and meanwhile, the Mace and Anakin are underneath this debris, and they fear that if they try to get themselves out, that they're just going to bring more debris on themselves. So they're relying on R2 to get a message to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant for help. And as R2 is leaving the bridge, he actually spots the bounty hunters approaching, and he decides he's got to stop them. And he does enough to get in their way that they decide, let's get the hell out of here and let's just blow this thing up to shreds from Slave One, which I guess, they wouldn't necessarily have proof anymore, but maybe they're just so pissed off that they decide it's not worth it and let's just make sure they're dead, so that we don't get anyone coming after us later on. So R2 he goes to the Jedi Starfighters, but he gets attacked by a Gundark, and here's this really cool sequence where he uses a cable from inside of him and attaches it to one of the ships, and then he attaches then sends the ship off to speeding away with the Gundark attached to it, which explodes. And that was like a really cool thing. But then it alerts the bounty hunters, and they're like, oh no, like Mace Windu must have got into his ship. So now we got to get to that starfighter and take it out. And they also are like, we got to jam all the communications. So R2 gets in the other ship, and he tries to he pilots it, tries to get away with it, and as far away as he can so that his communications aren't jammed. But unfortunately, Boba, being the good shot that he is, he's able to take out the communications of the starfighter. So then R2 has to get to one of the hyperspace rings and take off and travel all the way to Coruscant that way. And Boba does destroy one of the hyperspace rings, but cleverly R2 gets him to destroy one and gets in the other and takes off. And he does get all the way back to Coruscant and alerts the Jedi Council. So they do come back with they actually go, and Plo Koon and Ahsoka get alerted, and they bring us they bring a squad with them all the way back, and they go and rescue the Mace and Anakin, and it's all kind of hunky-dory. They're pretty well injured at this point. But they're definitely safe. And the most touching part, which I actually was for some reason very touched by this, Mace really gives props to R2 and just says, "Hey, you were, I had my doubts, but you really did a great job," because he was doubting R2 the whole time, and he was judging Anakin harshly for putting a lot of faith in R2, especially since most people, besides Han Solo being an exception, most of the main characters of Star Wars really like R2 and really don't mind the fact that his memory's never been wiped. And even though that makes him act crazy in some ways, it actually makes him a really amazing in other ways, especially the loyalty factor. So he does help. It's basically because of R2 that they rescue Anakin and Mace. And I guess if you really are a big R2 fan, if you've been looking for an R2 episode, this is the arc for you. I would definitely say, or at least this episode is the episode for you. So, of course, they rescue them just in time. And the only thing sort of was cheesy or not realistic for me, which, it's a cartoon and they do wrap up these episodes. And it's always tough because Jedi powers are clearly, and we wonder why they wouldn't use them in certain situations. And they, were trying to move the debris with the Force and they couldn't. And then a couple of clone troopers just get in there and they carry them out. So I don't know, maybe they were too injured to physically move themselves anyways. Maybe that was it. But other than that, it was a good episode, and it was pretty touching at the end with the compliments of R2's bravery. And that was that was fun for me to see. This was, a very enjoyable episode for me. The shots of the planet and the destruction of the Endurance ship were really cool. And they were really well animated, and some of the shots were really beautiful, which I thought was lacking in the first episode of this arc. And then another thing is there was just a lot of variety of danger presented throughout the episode, like the ship collapsing all around them, the bounty hunters trying to kill the Jedi, then the Gundarks are there. So it was a very tense episode for a lot of it. And of course, we know at the end of the day that our intrepid heroes will survive. It still provided a lot of tension for me. So I'm going to take a quick break here, and when we come back, we're going to cover the last episode in this arc. And this is episode 22 and a final episode of the season and the final episode of this arc. And I have to say, Clone Wars keeps getting better. The more you watch it, the further you get into it, it just keeps getting better. And the fact that the show is this good at season 2 is making me so excited to continue watching. Season 3, I'm really excited to see what it has to offer. But before we get there, we got to review this final arc and this final episode of season 2, which is episode 22. And let's talk about what happened in this episode. So Anakin and Mace are recovering on the Jedi Temple in Coruscant, and they're debating what should be done about the bounty hunter that tried, Boba Fett, who's trying to kill them. And it's interesting to see that Mace he's not interested in trying to track down Boba. He's like, yeah, what of it? We have a war going on. I can't be worried about something like this. And Anakin is like, well, shouldn't we try to bring him to justice? Just because even though you're not concerned about maybe your own self, he did destroy an entire ship. But they learn shortly after that conversation that they didn't know this before, but the Admiral Killian, Clone Commander Pons, and another clone officer are being held hostage by Aura and the bounty hunters. They send them a quick transmission, and after that, Mace is like, okay, now that's different. We should go rescue them. But Plo Koon and Ahsoka are there, and Plo Koon says, "Hey, you're in no condition to take on a mission like that." And really, it's just Boba is he hates you, and that will really just stir him up and fire him up and agitate him further if you go and do this mission. So I'm going to do it with Ahsoka, and I thought that was really smart and of him to do that. And I thought it's funny that it's always Ahsoka. There could be another Jedi that would be more experienced and better suited for the mission, but we have to admit that Ahsoka is pretty capable in her own right, and this is another training opportunity for her. So now we go back to the bounty hunters. So Castus is complaining that the job is becoming, it's more than what he bargained for. And he doesn't like getting involved with the Jedi. And he's like, yeah, before we were trying to kill this one Jedi, but now we've taken out an entire ship, and there's just like there's a lot of heat on us. So I'm done. And they decide that they're going to drop him off when they go to the planet Florum, which is where Hondo Ohnaka is, the pirate who we do see a lot in the show and also in Rebels. And they go to Florum and meet up with him. The main purpose of that, I believe, is so they can recruit, Aura wants to recruit Hondo to help. And I guess they used to be lovers. And he's like, nah, I'm not going to help you, but I'm not going to prevent you from doing what you're going to do, but I'm just going to be neutral. So he says, why don't we all just go have a drink and chat about things? And while that's happening, Castus is trying to send a message to another bounty hunter on Coruscant, tell them what is going on, and says like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff. I have a lot of information on stuff that's happening and stuff that might go down that could be useful to someone. But unfortunately for him, Aura is pretty crafty in her own right, and you could tell that she, I was surprised. It seemed like she was willing to. I could tell this guy was going to get killed. That's just how it looked like it was going that way once he started to want to back out, and also the fact that he was kind of teasing Boba in the previous episode about, wow, it would be a real shame if we only had to split this among 3 people instead of 4. And that's just like, it did foreshadow a bit, which is that's good writing, by the way, in my opinion. Good writing and a good way to set this up. And so as this conversation is going on, she has this little device in her ear, and so she's able to overhear it. And so she shoots him in the back, or shoots him while he's talking. And that was pretty cool for me to see, because I think it's, they're showing the underworld for what it is. And that guy gets killed, and Boba, importantly, he doesn't like seeing that, and he didn't, which I forgot to mention earlier, he didn't like seeing the hostages being involved. This was not part of the deal, and he does not seem to like cruelty. And earlier, while he felt so guilty that he went into the room that they were being held, and he started talking to Killian, and he was like, hey, I didn't sign up for this. This is not what I wanted, yada, yada. And Aura sees this happening, and then she goes in and starts beating him. So it's just, I think she, does that because she's very cruel, and also, she's just an evil person. And I think maybe she wanted Boba to see it so that to teach him a lesson, or to get him to not be so soft. I'm guessing that she wants him to develop into a good crew member for her, or like a good partner in the future, based on his talents and who his father was, and the fact that he's a clone, so he has the innate abilities to be a good soldier for her. So we're back at Florum, and this is when the trap is going to be created. A trap is going to be set up once again, and the Jedi, but while that's happening, Ahsoka and Plo Koon, Plo Koon decides, well, the best way for us to track him down is by going into the underworld. So we get to go to the underworld, which is always fun to do. And they go to a cantina because that's in any Star Wars show or any Star Wars content. If you're looking for a bad guy, you need to go to a cantina in the underworld and talk to people and have them tell you, even though they're suspicious of you. So she, Plo actually tells Ahsoka, hey, you need to be a little bit more subtle. You're being too much like your master, Anakin, who just goes into everything like a bull in a china shop. You need to be subtle. And so she overhears, and so she uses that advice, and she overhears that conversation from the guy that Castus was talking to about that information. And so she picks up on that and is like, oh my gosh, they're talking about a murder that just happened. They're talking about that bounty hunter, and this might be the group that we're looking for. But then they see her overhearing, and they try to attack Ahsoka, where at that point, Plo Koon and Ahsoka escape, and now they know where they need to go. So they escape out of the cantina, and then they are going to Florum to hopefully rescue Admiral Killian and the other clone admiral or officer. So they get to the planet and they meet up with Hondo, and Hondo's like, and Plo Koon says, "This is a trap, right?" And Hondo says, "Yes, this is a trap." And he's like, "Why would you tell me that?" And he says, "Well, because I want you to know that I have nothing to do with this." So Hondo he's a smart guy. He is going to stay neutral in this fight, and it does work out for him. But he does tell them that there's a trap in there and that Aura's in there waiting for him and to be careful. And so they go in there and they try negotiating the hostage. But of course, as soon as they enter the room, both of them have their own plan. And Aura reveals that she has the remaining hostages at a different location and that they'll be executed by Bosk if she gives him the word. And at that moment, both sides spring their own traps. Boba's holding a blaster to Plo Koon's head, and Tano comes out of the dark and he puts a lightsaber to Aura's neck and actually destroys her comlink so that she can't get any word to Bosk. And the bounty hunters, they kind of manage to escape with the diversion, but they do capture Boba. And at that point, Aura leaves without Boba, and Boba's really upset by that. And now another person is leaving him behind, and maybe he sees Aura for what she is. And then she leaves on a speeder, and Ahsoka is in close pursuit. And then Plo Koon starts to question Fett, who first refuses to tell them where the hostages are. But they go over to Hondo, and Plo Koon is like, Hondo, tell this young man to tell us where the hostages are. And Hondo says, Boba, your dad would have wanted you to be honorable, and the honorable thing to do would be to tell him where they are. And therefore, Plo does get the information. He tells Ahsoka, and they manage to get the location of the Admiral, and she manages to help subdue Bosk before the hostages were going to be executed. Aura comes in a few moments later, manages to take off in Slave One. She tries to escape, but Ahsoka jumps up onto the ship and slices off one of the stabilizers with her lightsaber, and we see the Ahsoka jump off, and then the ship explode in the background, which we can never assume that anyone's dead in Star Wars, but it looks like she is dead, or that is Aura's demise. And then the final scene, we get Boba and Bosk in custody, arriving at Coruscant, where they are met by Mace Windu. He apologizes for the destruction he caused, and he says that he would never forgive Mace Windu for killing Jango. And Mace Windu says, well, you're going to have to learn to forgive me. And he doesn't show any remorse for having killed Jango, and nor should he. But that is the end of the episode and the arc. And some of my final thoughts on this arc were that, yeah, Boba was he definitely shows that he's very angry. He's willing to commit violence, but he does have limits, and he does have maybe a redeemable aspect to him. On the other hand, Aura Singh is a real menace. She was beating her prisoners, and she does not really have any code of honor. And even the other members of the underworld were like, yeah, she's crazy. She's bad news. You want to stay away from her. I always like to see Plo Koon because he is always doing something smart, and he's being very wise. His suggestions for how to handle the mission, and then encouraging, the better side of Boba Fett to be honorable, and asking Hondo to help him persuade him, just shows how powerful this character is and how wise he is, and it's fun to see a Jedi be like that. He's kind of he's like the coolest Jedi probably that we've never seen in live action. Loved seeing the underworld. Good opportunity to bring that into the episode. Well, one funny thing was Boba tries to get a drink at the bar, and Aura doesn't let him. So that was pretty funny. I talked about earlier that the episode did a good job of setting up Castus's demise. And it was a good it was entertaining to see that guy get killed, because you could just see it coming. And all in all, I would just say, like I talked about before, this was a very good origin story for Boba Fett. He could have maybe gone a different way if it had not been for Aura Singh being the mentor that he had no other choice to go with. So who else was going to take care of him? And maybe someone else would have molded him into being a better guy, but she took advantage of him. And at the end of the day, though, we do see Boba has at least some redeemable qualities to him. And I just think that overall, I like this version of Boba probably more than the Boba Fett TV show. On the flip side, I liked when they first introduced Boba in The Mandalorian because he was so badass. But other than that, this Clone Wars pretty much does a good job with every character. Yeah, and he's lucky that the enemies he made were the Jedi and not someone else who he may not have fared so well with. So, yeah, they even talked about earlier that the Jedi don't keep grudges, so they're not going to likely come after us, and that ended up being true. Like, Mace did not want to pursue them, and only did that because he knew that the people that he wanted to rescue and save in the first place were still alive. So, all in all, my rating of this episode is probably a 3.5. It's on par, if not better, than some of the arcs we've seen, and I think there's room for growth because there's just more. There's a lot of potential for other characters that are going to have more build up and more payoff over the course of several seasons. But this was a one-off. I don't know if there's going to be more Boba Fett content coming up. And this was mainly to show what were the consequences of Jango Fett being killed. And I thought it did a good job with that. And that's all for today's review. This is the latest edition of, like I said, the Essential Clone Wars series here at Star Wars Loose Cannon. I'm going to keep doing these. You'll also be seeing Nick and I. We do topics that are more discussion-based. But I will be putting these out every now and then to fill in the gaps, and because it's also really fun to talk about these episodes. And guys, don't forget to go to magicmind.com/Star Wars 20 to get up to 48% off your first subscription, or to get 20% off your first time purchase of Magic Mind. And without further ado, I will see you all next time.